So the model life cycles is made by 4 main stages. The first one is related to the data preparation. The idea here would be to collect the data that would be important for training our property model to predict a specific property of interest. Then the second stage is related to the model design and building, so everything related to architecture type and featurization or defining specific baseline. After that, once the model has been trained, then we would like to assess the capability of the model to predict new incoming compound. So here we come to the third part of the model life cycles with the model validation. Finally, for the model deployment, this relates to everything like MLP implementation, model registration that allows the user to really access the model and use the model. Let's start with the first part of the data preparation. Basically, whenever you start with analyzing your problem, you have to evaluate the data that you can use to train your machine learning algorithm. So you may ask yourself, for example, how many compounds you can use in order to train the model. Or also the chemical space coverage. Is it very generalized or is it specific to a particular series of interest? For example, if we talk about specific project. You also have to look into the property space. So what's the dynamic range of the property you would like to predict? And finally, also the errors, because all this data comes from experimental measurement that may have some experimental errors. So you should be aware of the noise in your data. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see 2 examples of 2 of these aspects. So in the left plot, you can see the number of training compound versus the error rate for a specific model, which is the LEMDCK. Here you can see how the error rate would decrease over the increasing number of training compound. On the right, you can also appreciate a 2D representation of the chemical space. In particular, the blue dot represents some in-house data, while the red dot represents some publicly available data. And as you can see, the coverage of these 2 data sets is very different. So you should also consider this aspect when deciding on the data. Moreover, with respect to the data availability, this can really differ if we think about the academia world or the industry. Basically, in the academia, the data availability has really dramatically increased thanks to some open source databases like Campbell or PubChem. However, in many cases, these data are very heterogeneous because they may come from different data sources. They may be imbalanced because maybe in the publication, the positive examples are greater than the negative ones. And sometimes you have also to handle small data set as well. Moreover, it's very hard to find in the public domain multiple measurement for each compound. However, one really important aspect for the publicly available dataset is the possibility to really reuse the data, share with the scientific community in order to spread the scientific understanding. From the industry point of view, definitely the data sets are much larger, more heterogeneous, because maybe the experimental protocol is quite standardized, and moreover, you can get also multiple repeated measurement for each of the compound, and thus this allows you to estimate the experimental error. Of course, there are also some drawbacks. First of all, the internal data cannot be freely shared among the scientific community. And second, of course, for project dataset, you may still have to handle the challenges of small dataset, which can be also biased. On the right-hand side, you can see a bar plot where in the x-axis, you can find different assay. And with the red bars, you can find the data coming from the proprietary source, so in terms of dataset size. And with the blue bar, we have the dataset sizes of the public domain for the same assay. As you can see, there is quite a gap between the number of dataset sizes between industry and academia domain. But you can also appreciate how much variability we have also in the in-house data in terms of number of compound available. That's why we wanted to show you also the number of compounds that we have in-house with respect to different assay type. So our dataset can really span from very big dataset sizes, like in the case of the solubility, where we have more than 200K compounds, to the BSEPT assay, for which we have 3,500 compounds. The difference in size and the number of compounds can be really diverse. Sometimes you have very high throughput assay that are of interest of the project, so for which you have a lot of data points, or other that are high throughput, then can be quite challenging. Or you can have some properties that the project team would like to optimize, thus they will ask more data point to be measured. While other assay that are just used for having a red flag or a toxicity evaluation, thus maybe they are not so commonly used for measurement. Let's go now to the second part of the model life cycles that relates to model design and building. So in the case of model design and building, everything starts with the definition of the problem under analysis and the prediction task. Of course, this design and building can really differ if you think about the academia domain and industry, because these have two different types of goal in mind. In the academia context, the goal is really towards theory and method development. The idea would be really to improve the performance of the state-of-the-art model, and also try to develop new tools to improve the scientific understanding of a specific problem. This is quite important because it allows to go beyond what is already in place and improve the understanding of a specific problem. For the industry case, the goal is slightly different. It's really towards application. So in this case, we would like to really use model for experiment selection or compound prioritization. So our first goal is really to have robust and generalizable model that can help in having some application type of decision. In all these cases, it is important to define, before building the final model, baseline that can be used as a sort of low or minimum type of performances that one can expect for our model. This baseline can be defined by the expert user, or in the recent years, also the automated machine learning tools have been extensively used to democratize the model building part, allowing also not expert user to do that. Internally in Novartis, we have developed our own automated machine learning framework, which is also known as Prefer framework. This is now currently open source in GitHub, and this is based on Python and the known automated machine learning toolbox, which is AutoScikit-learn. The idea would be to combine this together with several molecular featurization that can span from very traditional molecular representation to database molecular representation, so more complex way of representing compound. In this way, the user can have a basically an overall view of all the possible combination of model and molecular representation that best fit for their specific purpose. When building a model, one should also consider the first part of the model life cycles related to the training data, so which data you have decided to use. Because internally, especially in the industry domain, you can access to a really large amount of data, also historical one, that can be used to enforce your model to make the model more generalizable. In general, when you try to combine multiple data and use also this historical data and all the existing data, you will build what we call the global model. Well, if you specifically want to use a subset of this data, maybe specifically for a series of interest, then you are going to build what we call local model. Of course, there are perceived advantages and disadvantages on using a local versus global model. In the case of local model, these are perceived also to be more representative of the specific context of interest, but definitely as a drawback, these are normally small data set, quite biased, and these are quite much harder to model in general, also because you have to take care about the risk of overfitting. For the global model point of view, the advantages are really the higher generalizability that you can have, including more data, so increasing your chemical space. But on the other hand, the large amount of diverse data set in the training set can introduce quite some noise. Elena Di Lascio, in her work, showed us how the global model compares to the local ones. So in this box plot, you can see on the x-axis the different assay, and on the y-axis the relative performance, where the positive relative performance is related to the case where the global is better than the local, and the negative performance are related to the case where the local is better than the global. Each data point represents a project data, so these were divided into the project data, and as you can see, overall, the global models tend to be better across the different assays with respect to the local one. Only 7% of the local models present an improvement greater than 20% of the global models. But what if you don't have in hand historical data to increase your data set and build a global model? Then you have to handle the challenges related to a small data set. Of course, in literature, you can find a lot of state-of-the-art techniques that try to handle a small data set and all the challenges related to that, from low performance to narrow applicability domain. Here, I just reported the FSmol benchmark suite that enables the comparison of different models in future learning tasks that would allow you to explore several techniques according to your training number of training compounds. And with that, I leave you the stage to Raquel.
Thank you very much, Jessica. So Jessica so far has presented the first two stages of the model life cycle, which are data preparation and the model design and building. And the next stage will be the model validation, which is crucial before using the models that we create. Validating a model consists in determining its predictive performance and also the generalization ability. To do that, one needs to use proper data splitting procedures and metrics. Despite all the advances in model design, for instance, the AutoML tools that Jessica has mentioned, the model validation is still essential. Sometimes the model validation might even require more domain knowledge than the model building. And this step of model evaluation is essential both in academia and industry. However, it usually focuses on different aspects. As we have highlighted, in academia, the focus is more toward theory and method development. In academia, we create new tools, new applications for existing tools, but also improve the understanding of the methods that already exist. In that context, the data splitting and metrics might be very different from the ones that we will use in an industrial application, where the model is used in the DMTA cycle and active drug discovery projects. In this case of the industrial applications, the application of the model will dictate the required level of quality and the required level of robustness, depending on which stage the model is applied or which endpoint we are trying to predict. That's why in industry, we always utilize the models prospectively in new molecules, and the validation setup has to mimic this. So we evaluate the models in the so-called time split. So we create the models with the older data, and then we try to predict the most recently generated molecules or synthesized molecules. In this plot that we have on the slide, which is very similar to the global versus local model plot, the performance of different projects, of the global models in different projects was assessed for different essays, which are again reported in the x-axis, and individual drug discovery projects, which are the different points. As you see, there is a shift of almost all the distributions towards positive values. And this is indicating that exactly the same models have higher errors when you evaluate them on the time split. So even focusing on a specific projects, which can have a similar series or most of the data from a specific series, estimating the performance with a random split is a lot of times over-optimistic. So we can think that the model will work better than it will work in reality. This is very important in industry. However, in academia, this temporal information is not available. And due to this absence of temporal information, but also because sometimes the questions at hand are not relevant on a prospective setting, this type of split is not as common. The splits in academia are more random or cluster-based, so to have different series to train and to validate the model and make it more challenging. Finally, one big advantage of academia in terms of validation is the existence of standardized benchmarking data sets or platforms, because data sharing is possible, and this makes easier to compare work done by different research groups. The next step in the model life cycle is that once the model has been built and validated, we need to deploy it. This deployment means making it available to the users. So probably this is more important in industry than in academia, and this includes many relevant tasks. For instance, model registration, creating documentation and guidelines for the users, integrating the models into existing tools, monitoring the performance over time, seeing if the data is drifting, and also doing a maintenance of the model after deployment. So the accountability and the ownership of the models are central pillars in industry. There is always one model owner who is responsible for all these mentioned tasks. However, in academia, the models are less often deployed. In general, there is a difficulty to keep models accessible and updated because it generally depends on research work of graduate students who might leave the group after a few years. However, very importantly, in academia, it's more common and I would argue more useful to share the code and the data used for the model building. So even model deployment is not common, the data and code sharing increases reproducibility, and it also facilitates that other groups can do follow-up investigations, or that from industry we can also reuse the models or the data provided in the public domain or by academia.